The morning sun poured through the wide glass windows of the small bakery, filling it with a golden glow that made the polished wooden counters shimmer. The smell of freshly baked bread, sugary pastries, and warm cinnamon floated in the air. Behind the counter, Taylor worked swiftly, hands moving with a confidence and grace that spoke to years of experience. A little girl stood on her tiptoes, clutching her mother's hand as her eyes grew wide, locked onto a display of pastel-colored cupcakes lined neatly in rows. "Which one do you think I should get, sweetheart?" Taylor asked, leaning forward to meet her eye level with a warm smile. The girl giggled shyly, pointing at a cupcake topped with a swirl of pink frosting and a tiny edible flower. "That one," she said, her voice bright and innocent. "Excellent choice," Taylor replied, carefully picking up the cupcake with gloved hands and placing it in a box. "And I'll throw in a little extra sparkle for you." Taylor reached under the counter and pulled out a small packet of glittery sugar, sprinkling a pinch onto the frosting with a flourish that made the girl's jaw drop in wonder. "Thank you," she exclaimed, beaming up at Taylor. Her mother smiled, the kind of genuine gratitude that warmed the room. Taylor lived for moments like these. It wasn't just about baking. This was about connection, making people feel seen and special. But the warmth in the bakery was disrupted like a sudden gust slamming a door shut. The loud, deliberate clack of heels striking the floor echoed through the space, and every head in the bakery instinctively turned toward the door. Meredith had arrived. Meredith strode in like she owned the place, her sharp stilettos clicking a beat of superiority that demanded attention. She was tall, with an icy demeanor and a gaze that dissected everyone in the room before dismissing them entirely. Her presence seemed to suck the ease and comfort out of the bakery, replacing it with a tension that coiled in the air like an unspoken warning. She didn't wait her turn. Meredith never waited. She marched right to the counter, ignoring the elderly couple who stood politely in line and the young man fiddling with his wallet. Her piercing gaze zeroed in on an employee near the espresso machine, a quiet young woman who had just started the week before. Meredith tapped her manicured nails against the counter, the impatient rhythm a subtle reminder that she considered herself far too important to waste her time here. "Excuse me," Meredith said, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. The young employee looked up nervously, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her apron. "This table over here," Meredith continued, gesturing toward the corner with a casual flick of her wrist, "has crumbs on it. Completely unacceptable." The girl stammered out an apology, glancing toward the table. There were indeed a few crumbs scattered on its surface, but Meredith's tone made it sound as if the offense was as grave as a crime. I'll get to that right away," the young woman said hurriedly, grabbing a cloth and hurrying past Meredith, who stepped back just enough to avoid touching her, as though proximity might somehow sully her pristine appearance. "Honestly," Meredith muttered, shaking her head as she leaned against the counter, "how do they hire people like that? No attention to detail whatsoever. It's as if standards don't matter anymore." Her voice wasn't quite low enough to be a private comment, and her words hung in the air for anyone to hear, including Taylor. Taylor had been busy arranging fresh loaves of bread on the display shelf when Meredith spoke, but the remark froze them in place for a moment. They straightened, slowly turning back toward the counter. "Good morning, Meredith," Taylor said evenly, keeping their voice calm. "What can I get for you today?" Meredith's eyes flicked over Taylor, scanning them like they were an object up for inspection. Her lips curled into a faint, condescending smile. "Ah, Taylor," she said, drawing out the name like it was a novelty she barely cared to remember. "Well, I see you're still here. Holding things together, are we?" Taylor didn't respond immediately, letting her words settle. It wasn't the first time Meredith had made such a veiled remark, and it likely wouldn't be the last. Always, Taylor said simply, their tone steady, refusing to give her the reaction she seemed to be fishing for. I suppose someone has to, Meredith continued, glancing at the cupcakes in the display case. I'd like a dozen of those, she said, pointing vaguely without making eye contact. And make sure the box is clean this time. Last time, there was a fingerprint on the lid. Can you imagine? She let out a soft, mocking laugh, shaking her head. Taylor nodded, taking a slow, measured breath. Their hands remained calm and precise as they picked up the cupcakes, one by one, placing them gently in the box. They could feel Meredith's gaze on them the entire time, sharp and scrutinizing, waiting for the smallest misstep to pounce on. You know, Meredith said suddenly, her tone almost casual, I always wonder about people like you. Do you ever think about what it must be like to aim higher? To, you know, not just settle for something like this. Taylor paused briefly, the question hanging in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. They looked up, meeting Meredith's cold eyes directly. For a moment, the bakery seemed unnaturally quiet, as though the entire room was holding its breath. I think, Taylor said slowly, their voice carrying a quiet strength, there's dignity in honest work, and I think everyone here does their best to make this bakery special. Meredith's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't respond to Taylor's words but shifted her gaze toward the box of cupcakes, her face tightening into an expression of mock surprise. Oh, she said, pointing with one perfectly manicured finger. That one's frosting looks a bit uneven. Did you not notice? Taylor looked at the cupcake, and then at Meredith. There was nothing wrong with the frosting. It was as perfect as the others. They knew Meredith didn't actually care about the cupcake. It was about control. She wanted to make them second-guess themselves, to belittle and undermine their confidence, because people like Meredith thrived on moments like this. I'll replace it, Taylor said, their tone polite but firm. They picked up the cupcake and swapped it for another, their movements deliberate and unshaken. Meredith leaned back slightly, watching Taylor with a smug expression. She tapped her credit card on the counter, the sharp clinking sound adding to the tension. There we go, she said after a moment. Was that so hard? You're welcome, by the way, for pointing that out. Some of us have standards, after all. Taylor handed her the neatly packaged box without a word, their face composed and calm. Meredith swiped her card, and as she turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder, tossing one final remark into the air like a grenade. Honestly, it's nice that they're hiring more people like you these days. Diversity and all that, but sometimes I wonder. Her voice trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished, cruelly dangling in the air. Taylor felt their jaw tighten, the heat of Meredith's words cutting deeper than they expected, but they stood tall, watching her leave, the bakery's door swinging shut behind her. The warmth and cheer of the room hadn't vanished entirely, but it had dimmed slightly, a reminder of the quiet battles fought in spaces like these. Taylor knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the small kitchen, mingling with the sound of gentle laughter and the faint hum of an old radio in the corner. Taylor's hands, far too small at the time for the heavy rolling pin they gripped, moved clumsily over the dough on the worn wooden countertop. Beside them stood their mother, a beacon of calm amidst the clutter. Her soft smile was patient and warm, the kind that could ease any worry. Like this, sweetheart, she said, her hands enveloping Taylor's smaller ones to guide them. The dough stretched evenly under their joined effort, the flour covering their hands, turning them white as snow. Baking is about love. You put your heart into every loaf, every roll, every cookie. People can taste that. Taylor nodded, even if they didn't fully understand at the time. It was enough that their mother believed it. She always spoke like that, as if baking was more than an act, like it was a gift. one that she was determined to pass on, no matter how many sacrifices it took. Life hadn't been kind to Taylor's family. Their father had passed away when they were just a child, leaving behind little more than old photographs and a mountain of bills that always seemed impossible to climb. The bakery was their mother's sanctuary, her way of keeping food on the table and the lights on, even if it meant long nights and aching hands. Taylor had learned early what resilience looked like because they'd watched their mother wear it every day like armor. The memories came back in flashes, as vivid as if they were unfolding right now. Taylor could still picture their mother, standing in the doorway of their tiny home late at night, her hair messy and her apron stained, but her face lit up by a tired kind of joy. "We made rent this month," she'd say softly, her voice equal parts triumph and relief. And no matter how little there was to celebrate, Taylor always saw her as the strongest person in the world. When they turned 10, Taylor started helping more seriously in the bakery, their small hands slowly learning how to work the equipment. "Mom," they'd said once after a long shift, wiping sweat off their brow, "doesn't it bother you? The way those people act sometimes." Their mother paused, her smile dimming but never vanishing. "You mean the ones who turn their noses up because they think we're not good enough?" She leaned down, looking Taylor right in the eye. "You don't let them steal your joy, love. They only have the power you give them." It sounded wise then, but years later, as Taylor looked back, they realized just how much grit those words had carried. Their mother had shouldered every insult, every look of disdain from people who thought her accent and darker skin meant she didn't belong behind the counter of her own bakery. And yet, she taught Taylor to carry pride in who they were, a seed that had been planted deep, even if it didn't always bloom as brightly. When her health began to fail, the world shifted. It was as if the threads holding their lives together started to unravel one by one. Taylor stayed at her side, making promises they weren't sure they could keep but needed to believe in. "I'll take care of everything, Mom," they had whispered one night, her frail hand resting lightly on theirs. "I'll make sure it stays open." Her answer was faint, but filled with trust. "I know you will. Keep the love alive, Taylor." Her passing shattered something that took years to rebuild. Taylor stayed behind to keep the bakery running, abandoning any dreams of leaving town or chasing a bigger future. Every kneaded batch of dough and neatly frosted cupcake carried her memory. The bakery wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was her legacy, her love poured into the lives of every person who walked through its doors. And Taylor wasn't going to let anyone erase that, no matter how tired or small they felt in the face of it all. The struggles came in waves. Competition opened up just down the street, an upscale cafe with marble countertops and impossibly perfect pastries, the kind of place that drew people with deep pockets and shallow judgment. Taylor tried not to let it get to them when regulars started disappearing, lured away by smooth lats and glossy advertising. They worked longer hours to make ends meet, holding tightly to the knowledge that while they couldn't outspend the competition, they could outcare them. Even so, prejudice never stayed far away. Sometimes it came in snide comments from customers, questioning whether Taylor really belonged at the front of the counter. "Don't you have someone else working here?" one man had asked once, barely glancing up as he browsed the shelves. "Someone who can explain what's in these?" The implication in his tone burned, but Taylor responded with the kind of calm their mother had drilled into them. "I can help you with whatever you need, sir." And then there were the more direct encounters, like the time someone left a note taped to the window that said, "Go back where you came from." Taylor had stared at it for a long moment before quietly pulling it down. They didn't tell anyone, not even their younger sibling, who had started coming home from college on weekends to help out at the bakery. Their sibling, Erica, was as sharp as she was driven. Taylor had worked tirelessly to help her get through school, taking on extra shifts so she wouldn't have to worry about tuition. "You don't have to do all this, Taylor," Erica had said once during one of their late-night talks over leftover pie and coffee. "You've already done more for me than anyone has a right to ask." But Taylor just smiled. "Family takes care of each other. That's how Mom raised us." Despite everything, there were moments of hope. Customers who left heartfelt notes about how the bakery reminded them of home. Parents who told Taylor their children begged to stop by for their favorite cookies after school. A local paper even wrote a small piece about the bakery once, calling it a hidden gem of heart and flavor. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was validation that their mother's dream lived on. Yet even with all that determination, there were nights when the weight felt unbearable. Nights when Taylor would sit at the kitchen table, staring at overdue bills with the same kind of helplessness their mother once hid so well. Sometimes they wondered if it was all worth it, if they should just sell the bakery and let someone else carry the burden. But then they'd think about her, the way her hands had moved so confidently over that old countertop, the way she'd laughed even when there was nothing to laugh about. Giving up wasn't an option, not for her and not for Erica. Taylor's hands shook a little as they closed the register late one night. It had been a slow day, the kind that left too much time for thoughts to wander to dark places. Erica walked in, a stack of books under her arm and a determined look on her face. "I was thinking," she said as she set the books down on the counter, "maybe it's time we update this place. You know, a fresh coat of paint, some new signage. Make it stand out again." Taylor raised an eyebrow, too drained to argue, but too moved to brush her off. "Where are we going to get the money for that?" "Don't worry about that," Erica said, her smile mischievous but full of hope. "I've got ideas, and you've got me." For the first time in weeks, Taylor felt the knot in their chest loosen just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a reminder that they weren't doing this alone. As they locked up that night, Taylor paused by the window, looking out at the quiet street beyond. Their reflections stared back, tired but unbroken. This place, this bakery, was more than just a business. It was a lifeline, a legacy, and a promise. And no matter how many times life tried to push them down, Taylor knew they would rise again. Just like the dough beneath their hands, warm and resilient. Always rising. Always. The morning rush had just died down when Taylor heard it, the sound of sharp, purposeful heels echoing against the bakery's tiled floor. Meredith was back. Taylor's jaw tightened for just a moment before they forced their features into a calm, professional expression. No matter how many times she walked through those doors, they reminded themselves to stay composed. Meredith wasn't just a difficult customer. She was the storm clouds rolling into an otherwise sunny day, bringing tension wherever she went. "Is anyone even working here?" Meredith's voice cut through the bakery like a knife, loud enough to make the few other customers glance nervously toward her. She tapped her fingers on the counter impatiently, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the wood. "Honestly, it's like no one respects my time." Taylor stepped forward from behind the display case, where they had been carefully rearranging rows of delicate macarons. "Good morning, Meredith," they said with a steady voice. "What can I get for you today?" Meredith looked them up and down, her lips curling slightly as if she'd just bitten into something sour. Finally, "I was starting to wonder if this place had gone completely downhill." She let out a sigh, exaggerated and theatrical. "I need a dozen croissants. Fresh ones, not the ones sitting out all day, drying up." "These are all freshly baked this morning," Taylor said, motioning toward the golden, flaky pastries displayed neatly behind the glass. Meredith leaned closer, scrutinizing them as if she were inspecting diamonds and not baked goods. "Are you sure? Because they look a little sad." She waved a dismissive hand. "And I don't want them from this batch. Go in the back and bring me fresh ones." Taylor's fingers brushed against the edge of the counter, gripping it lightly as they resisted the urge to sigh. All the croissants are from the same batch, Meredith, but I'd be happy to pick out the ones you like best. Is that a problem? Meredith shot back, ignoring their offer entirely. Do I need to speak with someone else who understands customer service? There's no problem at all, Taylor replied evenly. Their calm tone didn't waver, though they could feel the burn of Meredith's words settling under their skin. They grabbed a tray and began carefully selecting croissants, placing them in a box with practiced precision. Behind them, a mother and child stood waiting their turn, their presence a quiet contrast to Meredith's brash demeanor. The little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing at a strawberry tart in the case. Taylor glanced at them briefly, offering an apologetic smile that the mother returned with understanding. Meredith, of course, noticed none of this, or simply didn't care. Hurry up, she snapped. Do you not realize how valuable my time is? People like you always think you can coast through life doing the bare minimum. She narrowed her eyes as Taylor placed the last croissant into the box and slid it across the counter. And don't you think for a second I don't notice how you people get special treatment. All these hiring quotas these days, it's laughable. The words landed like a slap. A young couple browsing in the corner glanced up, startled by her volume and venom, but said nothing. Taylor's hands paused for the briefest moment before they resumed folding the bakery's branded paper bag around the box. That'll be $12, they said quietly, their voice carefully neutral. Meredith let out a dry laugh as she reached for her wallet. 12? For these? This is ridiculous. No wonder your customers are going somewhere else. She glanced over her shoulder at the other patrons, addressing no one in particular. Honestly, I don't know how this place stays open. Taylor straightened, meeting her gaze head-on. We pride ourselves on quality here, Meredith. I assure you, these croissants are worth every penny. Meredith snorted, swiping her credit card with dramatic flair. Well, we'll see about that. Her gaze flicked back toward the waiting mother and child. Don't keep them waiting too long now, or are you going to give them the same exceptional service? The mother stiffened, clutching her son's hand protectively, but said nothing. Taylor bit the inside of their cheek, the heat rising in their chest as Meredith turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. They knew the rhythm by now. Meredith's insults came like clockwork, leaving little bruises each time, subtle enough to be brushed off but sharp enough to sting if left unattended. Taylor exhaled slowly, refocusing their attention on the waiting customers. Hi there, they said gently, crouching slightly to address the child's wide-eyed curiosity. Is the strawberry tart still your favorite? The boy nodded, his shyness melting under Taylor's warm smile. As they carefully wrapped the tart in a small box, the mother offered a quiet thank you. It was brief, but Taylor felt the gratitude carried in her tone, a soothing balm against the morning's earlier encounter. But Meredith wasn't done. Not long after, she reappeared. This time, she was flanked by a man who looked vaguely familiar, one of the city's influential food critics. Taylor stiffened slightly, the tension settling in their shoulders like a weight. The man scanned the bakery with practiced efficiency, and it didn't take long to realize why Meredith had brought him here. She wasn't just an irate customer anymore, she was on a mission to prove a point. Rick, she began loudly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, I just had to bring you here. I've been telling everyone I know about this bakery, and not in a good way. She threw Taylor a pointed look before gesturing dramatically at the display case. It's all so underwhelming, but I thought you should see for yourself. Taylor's heart pounded as the man approached the counter. Meredith lingered close by, her arms crossed smugly. Go ahead, she urged. Order something. See if I'm wrong. Taylor plastered on their most professional smile, their mind racing for how to handle what they knew would be a carefully orchestrated attack. "Good afternoon," they said smoothly. "What can I get for you today?" The critic hesitated for a moment before settling on a selection of mini tarts. Taylor's hands moved instinctively, each motion deliberate and precise, despite the pressure mounting behind their calm facade. Meredith watched every step with a critical eye, occasionally throwing out snide comments that hovered just beneath outright insult. "You know," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "presentation matters. It's the first thing people notice. You'd think someone would make that a priority." Taylor kept their eyes on their work, refusing to rise to the bait, but the tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with one of the bakery's knives. As the man paid and sampled his purchase, Meredith hovered expectantly, clearly eager for confirmation of her complaints. To Taylor's relief, and Meredith's obvious irritation, the critic nodded approvingly. "Not bad," he said simply, before turning to leave. Meredith's face tightened with barely concealed annoyance, but she quickly covered it with a forced laugh. "Not bad," she echoed mockingly. "I suppose some people settle for mediocrity." It was too much. The frustration bubbling under Taylor's calm demeanor finally threatened to spill over. But before they could respond, another customer, an older man who had been quietly watching the scene unfold, cleared his throat. "You know," he said, his voice steady and firm, "I've been coming here for years, and I've always been impressed by the quality, not just of the food, but of the people." Meredith turned to glare at him, clearly unprepared for the intervention. Taylor's chest swelled with quiet gratitude, but they stayed silent, letting the moment play out. "Maybe," the man continued, "you should try appreciating good work when you see it. Not everything needs tearing down." For a moment, the bakery was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Meredith opened her mouth as if to reply, but no words came. She huffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder as she turned on her heel and stalked out of the bakery. The door swung shut behind her with a resounding thud, leaving a sense of quiet triumph in her absence. Taylor exhaled, their hands steadying themselves on the counter as a wave of relief washed over them. They glanced toward the older man, who offered a subtle nod before returning to his seat. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was a small victory, and for now, that was enough. The email sat unopened in Taylor's inbox, the subject line glaring at them like a challenge they weren't ready to face. Quarterly performance analysis. Immediate attention required. Normally, financial reports and performance emails were routine, just part of keeping the bakery afloat. But today, after everything Meredith had said, the words felt heavy, like they carried more than just numbers. Taylor hesitated, their finger hovering over the trackpad, as doubt crept into their thoughts. What if it wasn't just Meredith's cruelty that was hitting the bakery hard? What if there was something deeper going on, something they hadn't noticed? With a deep breath, they clicked. The report was grim. Sales were down more than they had realized, especially over the past few months. For a moment, Taylor let their head drop into their hands. They weren't sure whether to feel frustrated, defeated, or just plain scared. How had it gotten this bad so quickly? They scrolled through the breakdown of revenue and expenses, their eyes catching on a line that didn't quite make sense. External consulting fee, $3,200. Taylor frowned. They didn't remember approving anything like that. As far as they knew, no consultants had been brought in recently. The bakery couldn't even afford fresh paint right now, let alone some fancy expert. Their heart raced as they stared at the number, the discomfort growing with every second. Something was off. "Hey, you good?" Erica's voice snapped Taylor out of their daze. She stood in the doorway, her hands full of books, but her eyes full of concern. She had been coming back from campus every weekend to help out at the bakery, balancing her law classes and their family obligations like it was nothing. Taylor had no idea how she did it, but right now, they were grateful for her presence. "I don't think so," Taylor admitted, turning the laptop toward her. "Look at this. Does this seem right to you?" Erica set her books down, leaning over the counter to get a better look. $3,000 for consulting. She read aloud, her brow furrowing. "No, that doesn't seem right at all. Who's approving these expenses?" "I have no idea," Taylor said, shaking their head. "It's like things are slipping through the cracks. Sales are down, and I think something shady might be going on. It doesn't add up." Erica grabbed a stool and sat down beside Taylor, her face tightening with focus in the way it always did when she was deep in problem-solving mode. "Okay," she said, crossing her arms. "Start from the beginning. What exactly is going on here?" Taylor explained everything: the dwindling finances, the strange charges, and how the bakery had been losing customers to competitors over the past few months. As they talked, Erica's expression shifted from thoughtful to skeptical to outright suspicious. When Taylor mentioned Meredith's repeated confrontations, Erica's jaw tightened. "She's connected to this somehow," Erica said decisively. "I can feel it." "Meredith?" Taylor asked, doubt creeping into their voice. "I mean, yeah, she's horrible, but what does she have to do with our finances? She's just, well, Meredith." "You said yourself she brags about her social connections," Erica pointed out. "She walks in here like she owns the place. I wouldn't be surprised if she's using those connections to mess with your business. You said she brought in that food critic, right? What if she's pulling strings behind the scenes?" The idea sounded almost ridiculous at first, but the longer Taylor thought about it, the more plausible it became. Meredith had made it clear she considered the bakery beneath her, but what if she wasn't just trying to belittle them for fun? What if she actually had an agenda? "What do we do?" Taylor asked, their voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. "I can't just accuse her of whatever this is." "We don't accuse," Erica said firmly. "We find proof." The next day, Taylor arrived at the bakery earlier than usual, determination sparking in their chest despite the gnawing worry in the back of their mind. They started going through old invoices, receipts, and bank statements, looking for anything that seemed out of place. Erica joined them after her morning classes, her laptop humming as she cross-referenced documents and checked for legal patterns Taylor wouldn't have known to look for. Hours passed, and frustration grew. Everything seemed normal on the surface, which only made Taylor more suspicious. If something was wrong, it was being hidden carefully. Taylor was about to give up for the day when Erica suddenly froze, her eyes locked on the screen. "Taylor," she said slowly, "you need to see this." Taylor moved closer, their heartbeat quickening as Erica pointed to a digital document. This consulting fee, the payment was approved through a company called Silvercap Partners. Look them up. Taylor grabbed their phone and typed the name into the search bar. The results were sparse, but one thing immediately caught their attention. Silvercap Partners was listed as a small business consulting firm, but the owner's name made their blood run cold. "Meredith Coleman," Taylor said aloud, their voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. "She owns the company," Erica confirmed, her tone hard. "She's been funneling money out of this bakery, Taylor. She's stealing from you." The weight of it hit Taylor like a freight train. Meredith wasn't just an awful customer with a sharp tongue and an inflated sense of self-importance. She was sabotaging the bakery from within, exploiting whatever influence she had to line her own pockets. The thought of it made Taylor's stomach churn with a toxic mix of fury and betrayal. "She acts like we're beneath her, like we don't belong here," Taylor muttered, their fists clenching. "And all this time, she's been doing this? How could she?" "Because she thinks she can get away with it," Erica said simply. People like her always do, until someone stops them. Taylor exhaled sharply, trying to keep their emotions in check. What's the next step? They asked, looking to Erica for guidance. We build a case, Erica said without hesitation. We document everything, these charges, her connection to the company, any evidence that shows she's been targeting your business. Then we take it to the right people. Taylor nodded, their resolve solidifying like cement. For years, they had endured Meredith's sneers and cutting remarks, holding their head high because it was the only way they knew how to survive. But this wasn't just about pride or dignity anymore. This was about justice, for themselves, for their family, and for the bakery their mother had poured her soul into. And Taylor wasn't going to back down. As they worked late into the night, piecing together a timeline of Meredith's corruption, Taylor couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every document they uncovered, every connection they made, brought them one step closer to the truth. And for the first time in a long time, Taylor felt like the scales might finally tip in their favor. By the time they finished for the night, the bakery was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. Erica stretched and yawned, packing up her laptop as Taylor organized the stack of printed documents on the counter. We've got enough to get started, Erica said, her voice heavy with tiredness, tinged with determination. Let's take this to someone who can actually do something about it. Taylor nodded, their gaze drifting toward the framed photo of their mother on the wall. We'll make this right, they whispered softly, as if speaking directly to her. I promise. But deep down, they knew the battle wasn't over yet. Meredith wasn't the type to go down without a fight. If Taylor wanted to win, they would need more than just evidence. They'd need to prove that people like Meredith couldn't bully and cheat their way through life without consequences. And as Taylor locked up the bakery for the night, their resolve only grew stronger. This wasn't just about fighting for the bakery anymore. It was about standing up for everything they believed in. The bakery was unusually busy for a Wednesday morning, the bell above the door jingling every few seconds as a steady stream of customers came and went. Taylor moved quickly behind the counter, their hands precise as they wrapped pastries, took orders, and flashed polite smiles at everyone who passed through. It was the kind of busy day that should have felt satisfying, but instead, tension simmered just beneath the surface. They could feel it before they even saw her, the change in atmosphere, the prickling sensation at the back of their neck. Meredith. She strode through the door, her presence as cold and sharp as ever, and immediately claimed the space around her. She didn't wait in line. Meredith never did. Instead, she made her way straight to the counter, her heels clicking like tiny gunshots against the tiles. Taylor's shoulders stiffened as they saw her approaching, but they willed themselves to stay calm. I need to speak with whoever's in charge here, Meredith announced loudly, her voice slicing through the gentle hum of conversation. Heads turned, curious eyes darting between her and Taylor. Immediately, Taylor wiped their hands on a towel, steadying themselves before stepping forward. That would be me, they said evenly. How can I help you, Meredith? Her gaze snapped to them, sharp and unwavering. You can help me by explaining why I wasted $200 on pastries that were ruined the moment I got them home. Taylor frowned, genuinely confused. I'm sorry to hear that, they said, careful to keep their tone neutral. What exactly was the issue? Meredith scoffed, crossing her arms. What wasn't the issue? She shot back. The frosting was smeared, the texture was off, and one of the cupcakes looked like it had been dropped. It was embarrassing. I served them at an event, and people were questioning whether I got them from a gas station. Her words were loud enough for the entire bakery to hear, her tone dripping with disdain. Taylor's chest tightened. They knew for a fact the order had been handled perfectly. The pastries had been packaged with extra care, something they'd ensured personally because they knew how picky Meredith could be. But this wasn't just about the pastries. It never was. "Meredith," Taylor began, keeping their voice calm, "I checked your order myself before it left the bakery. Everything was intact. And now you're calling me a liar." Meredith cut them off, her voice rising. The room went silent, all eyes now fully on the unfolding scene. A knot formed in Taylor's stomach as they realized how quickly this was spiraling. "Is that what you're doing? Accusing me of making this up?" "No, I'm not saying that at all," Taylor replied, feeling the heat rise to their cheeks. "You're saying your word is better than mine," she interrupted again, her tone icy. "That figures. People like you always think you're untouchable, don't you?" Taylor froze. The words hit harder than they expected, not because they were new, but because Meredith knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just accusing them of incompetence. She was trying to cut them down, chip away at their dignity in front of an audience. Taylor's fingers gripped the counter, their knuckles white with tension. Every part of them wanted to fire back, to defend themselves, but they knew that's what she wanted, a reaction she could twist into something else. One of the customers, an older woman near the back of the line, cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've been coming here for years, and Taylor's work has always been excellent. If there's a problem, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." Meredith turned to the woman with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm sure you're quite satisfied with the basics," she said dismissively, "but I expect a certain standard of quality. It's not my fault if others don't." Taylor opened their mouth to respond, but before they could, Meredith dropped her next bombshell. "You know," she said loudly, looking around the bakery, "it's no wonder things are slipping around here. This place used to have standards, but now it's run by someone who doesn't have the experience or professionalism to handle real customers." She gestured toward Taylor. "Honestly, I'm surprised it's even still open." The words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging. Taylor felt the tension in the room deepen as whispers rippled through the customers. The humiliation burned hot in their chest, a mix of anger and shame swelling up as they struggled to keep their composure. Meredith smiled, clearly pleased with herself, and turned to leave. Taylor barely made it through the rest of the day. Their mind replayed the incident over and over, the memory of Meredith's sharp words cutting deeper every time. By the time they locked up that evening, the bakery felt suffocating, its warmth replaced by an oppressive heaviness. At home, Erica was waiting for them, sprawled out on the couch with a textbook open in her lap. She looked up when Taylor walked in, immediately noticing the look on their face. "What happened?" she asked, setting the book aside. Taylor sank into a chair, their head in their hands. "Meredith happened," they muttered. Erica sat up, her expression hardening. What did she do this time? Taylor told her everything. The accusations, the public humiliation, the way Meredith had turned the room against them with just a few carefully chosen words. By the time they finished, Erica looked ready to march down to the bakery and confront Meredith herself. "You can't let her get away with this," Erica said, her voice firm. "She's not just messing with you anymore, she's trying to ruin you." "I know," Taylor said quietly, "but what can I do? She's got all the connections, all the influence. If I fight back, she'll just make it worse." Erica shook her head, her frustration evident. "You can't think like that, Taylor. People like her count on you giving up. They thrive on it." Taylor didn't respond. The weight of it all felt crushing, like no matter what they did, it would never be enough. But deep down, they knew Erica was right. Giving up wasn't an option. They had fought too hard to get to this point, and they weren't going to let someone like Meredith take it all away. The next morning, Taylor found a quiet moment to sit down with Mr. Rivers, the bakery's elderly owner. He was sitting in his usual spot by the window, sipping coffee and watching the world go by with a contented smile. Taylor hesitated before approaching, unsure how to bring up everything that had been weighing on them. "Something on your mind, kid?" Mr. Rivers asked, his voice warm and knowing. Taylor sat down across from him, fidgeting with the hem of their apron. "It's Meredith," they said finally. She's trying to destroy this place, and I don't know how to stop her." Mr. Rivers nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Meredith's been trouble since the day she started coming here," he said. "People like her, people who think the world owes them something, they're always looking for someone to tear down. But you can't let her win, Taylor. You're stronger than that." "It doesn't feel that way," Taylor admitted, their voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Rivers leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Let me tell you something," he said. "This bakery, it's more than just a business. It's a place where people find comfort, where they feel seen and cared for. You've carried that legacy better than anyone could have asked. Don't let someone like Meredith make you forget that." Taylor nodded, their chest tightening with emotion. Mr. Rivers's words were a lifeline, a reminder of why they had fought so hard to keep the bakery alive. But they also knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to stop Meredith. They needed action. That night, Taylor stayed late, going through the financial records one more time, and that's when they found it. Another strange charge, this one for advertising that had never been approved. As they dug deeper, a clearer picture began to form. Meredith wasn't just sabotaging the bakery through her words and actions. She was using her influence to manipulate the business behind the scenes. It was the proof they needed, but Taylor knew that confronting Meredith directly wouldn't be enough. They needed a plan, one that would expose her for who she really was and ensure she couldn't hurt anyone else. With Erica's help, they began to piece together the final steps, their determination growing with every new discovery. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice, and Taylor was ready for whatever came next. The bakery was alive with activity, more packed than it had been in months. The warmth of ovens mixed with the buzz of conversations and the occasional tinkling laughter of children. It was the community event Taylor had been planning for weeks, a showcase of local talent, live music, and free samples designed to remind everyone why the bakery was the heart of the neighborhood. Taylor moved quickly between stations, arranging tables, replenishing trays of treats, and greeting customers with practiced ease. But beneath the surface of their calm demeanor was a fire of anticipation. Today wasn't just about bringing people together. It was about finally exposing the truth. Meredith arrived late, of course, fashionably dramatic as always. Her heels announced her presence before her voice did, but she didn't wait for attention. "Oh, look," she said loudly as she swept into the room, her tone dripping with false amusement. "A little carnival at the bakery. How quaint." Heads turned to her, some customers exchanging uneasy glances. Meredith's reputation preceded her, but no one dared to confront her outright. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Taylor, who stood by the counter. Her smile widened, predatory and cold. "Taylor," she called out, as if addressing an old friend. "Busy day, I see. I hope everything's going smoothly." Her voice carried that familiar edge, the unspoken challenge hidden beneath every word. Taylor straightened, their hands resting lightly on the counter. Very smoothly, they replied evenly, locking eyes with her. There was no hesitation, no flinch, and it was clear from the flicker of annoyance in Meredith's expression that she wasn't used to that kind of composure. She strolled over, her movements calculated, stopping just close enough to speak without raising her voice. "You know," she began, her voice low but meant to be overheard by the people nearest them. "It's such a shame this bakery hasn't been able to keep up. I've heard rumors. people saying they come here less and less because of declining standards. Taylor didn't take the bait. They simply smiled, their hands tightening imperceptibly into fists behind the counter. "That's interesting," they said lightly. "I guess today's turnout proves them wrong." Meredith's lips twitched, just slightly, before she leaned in closer. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Taylor," she murmured. "Success is fleeting, especially for people like you." Taylor didn't respond immediately. Instead, they reached under the counter and pulled out a small microphone, testing it briefly before addressing the crowd. "Excuse me, everyone," they called out, their voice ringing clear and strong over the din of the bakery. The room gradually quieted as heads turned toward them, curiosity and interest lighting up the faces of those gathered. "Thank you all for coming today. It means so much to see so many familiar faces here, supporting what we've built together." Taylor paused, scanning the crowd. Their gaze lingered on Meredith, who stood near the front with her arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. "This bakery isn't just a business," Taylor continued. "It's a part of this community, a place where people can feel welcome, no matter who they are. And today, I want to take a moment to talk about why that's so important." A ripple of interest passed through the crowd as Taylor's tone shifted, more serious now, more deliberate. They reached for a small remote and clicked a button, and the screen mounted on the wall behind them came to life. A slideshow began to play. Images of invoices, financial records, and documents tied to Silvercap Partners. Each one was labeled clearly, their contents impossible to deny. "For months, this bakery has been targeted," Taylor said, their voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of determination. "We've faced challenges that go beyond competition, unfair practices, dishonest tactics, and deliberate sabotage. And as much as I wish that wasn't true, the evidence speaks for itself." Gasps rippled through the room as the crowd took in the presentation. Taylor clicked the remote again, and the screen displayed a name, Meredith Coleman, listed as the owner of Silvercap Partners. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Meredith. "What is this nonsense?" Meredith demanded, her voice loud but unsteady. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to deflect attention from your own failures." "I'm presenting facts," Taylor replied firmly. "These charges on our accounts, they were processed through your company. Funds were funneled out of this business without approval, and it doesn't stop there." Taylor clicked again, and a video played. It was footage from a security camera, one of Meredith's more recent tirades at the counter, where she not only insulted Taylor but openly suggested the bakery wasn't worth visiting. Her words, recorded clearly, played back in the room. "This place used to be good, but not anymore. Honestly, they should just shut it down." The weight of her words sank into the crowd. Some of the customers murmured to each other, their expressions shifting from confusion to anger. Others looked at Meredith with disbelief, as if they couldn't believe the person before them had the audacity to act so brazenly. Meredith's face went pale, then red. "This is outrageous," she shouted, her voice rising as she stepped forward. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "You're right," Taylor said, their gaze never wavering. "I didn't, not at first, but now I do. And so does everyone else." They stepped out from behind the counter, meeting Meredith's furious gaze head-on. "You've spent your life tearing others down, thinking your privilege protects you, but not this time." The crowd stirred, emboldened by Taylor's defiance. One by one, voices began to rise in support. "Taylor's the reason I keep coming here," one customer said firmly, "not just for the pastries, but because they actually care." "Yeah," someone else added, "this bakery has always been about heart. What's Meredith ever done for this community?" Meredith turned, her composure cracking as the weight of the room shifted against her. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Taylor spoke again, their voice steady and resolute. "This isn't just about me or this bakery," they said. "It's about standing up to people who think they're above accountability. It's about showing that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, it doesn't give them the right to hurt others." The room erupted in applause. Meredith stood frozen for a moment, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Finally, with a huff of indignation, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the floor. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving the bakery filled with the sound of cheering and clapping. Taylor exhaled, the tension in their chest finally releasing. They glanced at Erica, who stood near the back of the room with a proud smile on her face. Mr. Rivers raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast, his eyes twinkling with approval. As the applause died down, Taylor stepped back to the counter, their hands steady now as they picked up the microphone one last time. "Thank you," they said simply, their voice thick with emotion. "Not just for today, but for standing by me, by us. This bakery is yours as much as it is mine, and together, we'll make sure it stays a place for everyone." The crowd erupted into cheers again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Taylor let themselves feel the victory. It wasn't just about exposing Meredith. It was about proving that resilience, community, and integrity mattered more than any amount of power or privilege. Later that evening, as the last of the customers trickled out and the bakery returned to its usual quiet, Taylor stood by the counter, their heart full despite the exhaustion. Erica walked up and clapped a hand on their shoulder. "You did it," she said, her smile wide. "We did it," Taylor corrected, their gaze drifting to the framed photo of their mother on the wall. In the quiet warmth of the bakery, they could almost hear her voice, gentle and proud, and for the first time in a long time, Taylor felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. The article dropped early in the morning, long before the first customers arrived at the bakery. Taylor read it once, then again, their hands trembling slightly as their eyes scanned the text. Bold, black letters stretched across the top of the page, "Community icon or con artist. Local businesswoman exposed in fraud scandal." Below it was a photo of Meredith, dressed impeccably as always, stepping out of a car with her trademark confidence. The image didn't match the story beneath it, a scathing expose detailing how she had manipulated contracts, funneled funds, and used her influence to cripple small businesses for her own gain. Taylor set their phone down, the weight of the moment settling over them like a blanket. This was it. Everything they had worked for, all the evidence they had painstakingly gathered with Erica, had finally come to light. People would know the truth now. Taylor expected relief, maybe even a sense of triumph, but instead, all they felt was a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. By the time the bakery opened, the news was already spreading. Regulars came in with knowing glances and murmurs of support. "Good for you, Taylor," one of them said as they placed their order. About time someone stood up to her. Others were quieter, nodding as if in silent agreement. The mood in the bakery was different today, lighter, almost electric, as though the entire community had collectively exhaled. It didn't take long for Meredith to arrive. Taylor had expected her sooner, truthfully. When the bell above the door jingled, and she stepped inside, the hum of conversation halted like someone had flipped a switch. Meredith looked the same as ever, head held high, shoulders squared, but there was something else now, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. For the first time, she seemed to notice how the room had turned against her. The whispers, the sideways glances, the barely contained looks of judgment, it was all directed at her. "Taylor," she said, her voice sharper than usual, "I assume you think this circus was a victory." Taylor stepped out from behind the counter, their hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through them. "It's not a victory, Meredith," they said evenly. "It's the truth. People deserve to know what you've been doing." "And you think this changes anything?" She spat, her tone venomous. "These people," she waved a hand toward the customers, her disdain palpable, "will forget about this in a week. They'll move on. My reputation doesn't break that easily." Taylor met her gaze, unflinching. That might have been true before, but not this time. Meredith's jaw tightened, her composure cracking for just a moment. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You're nothing. A cashier playing pretend with a little bakery. You don't belong in my world." Taylor stepped closer, their voice calm but filled with undeniable strength. "And you don't belong in mine." The words landed like a blow, and Meredith blinked, stunned into silence. For a moment, the bakery was still, the air thick with tension. Then, one of the customers near the counter, an older woman who had watched the exchange quietly, spoke up. "You've been tearing people down for years, Meredith," she said, her tone steady. "And we've let you. But not anymore." Another voice chimed in, then another, until the entire room seemed to come alive with quiet but firm declarations of solidarity. Meredith's confident facade began to crumble under the weight of the collective disapproval. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she looked around, realizing she was outnumbered in more ways than one. "You've said enough," Taylor said, their voice firm but without malice. "It's time to go, Meredith." Meredith hesitated, her hand twitching at her side like she wanted to say something more, to fight back one last time, but the room was against her now, and she knew it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out, the door jingling behind her like a final punctuation mark. The room erupted into applause. Taylor stood there, the sound washing over them, and for the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel the full weight of everything they had endured. It wasn't just about Meredith. It was about proving that kindness and integrity could win, even against people who seemed untouchable. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mr. Rivers called Taylor into the small office at the back of the bakery. He gestured for them to sit, his usual warm smile replaced with a more serious expression. On the desk in front of him was a neatly folded stack of papers. "Taylor," he began, his voice tinged with pride, "you've done something incredible today, not just for this bakery, but for this community." Taylor shook their head, still grappling with the events of the day. "I just wanted the truth to come out," they said quietly. "It wasn't just about me." "And that's exactly why I'm doing this," Mr. Rivers replied, sliding the papers toward them. "This bakery isn't just mine, Taylor. It never has been. It's for the people who love it, who keep it alive, and no one has fought for it harder than you." Taylor frowned, picking up the papers and scanning them. It took a moment for the words to sink in. "Mr. Rivers, are you—" "It's yours now," he interrupted gently. "Well, partly. You'll have a share in the ownership, and I'll still be around to help. But this place deserves a future, Taylor, and you're the person to make sure it has one." Tears welled in Taylor's eyes as they clutched the papers, their emotions overwhelming them. I don't know what to say," they stammered. "Say you'll keep making your mother proud," Mr. Rivers said, his smile returning. "That's all the answer I need." The next few weeks were transformative. The story of the bakery's victory spread, drawing in new customers and reuniting old ones. The once dwindling business found new life, fueled by the community's support and Taylor's unwavering commitment. Erica spent her weekends helping more than ever, their bond growing stronger as they worked side by side to build something lasting. Even Meredith's story didn't end the way Taylor expected. One afternoon, long after the chaos had settled, the door jingled softly, and Taylor looked up to see her standing there, different somehow. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar hesitance. She approached the counter, holding a small envelope in her hand. "I wanted to talk," she began, her voice quieter than Taylor had ever heard it. "If you'll let me." Taylor hesitated, their first instinct to dismiss her, but something in her expression stopped them. Reluctantly, they nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Meredith placed the envelope on the counter and slid it forward. "I've made mistakes," she admitted, her words slow and deliberate. "More than I can count, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to fix what I can." Taylor opened the envelope cautiously, finding a check inside, a donation, not to the bakery, but to a local charity Taylor had partnered with for years. The gesture was small compared to the damage Meredith had done, but it was a start. "I don't need your money," Taylor said evenly, sliding the envelope back toward her. "What this bakery needs, what this community needs, is people who lift others up instead of tearing them down." Meredith nodded, her expression somber. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said softly, "but thank you." As she left, Taylor stood behind the counter, watching the door close behind her. It wasn't the ending they expected, but it felt right. Redemption wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about taking the first step. That night, as Taylor locked up the bakery, they glanced at the photo of their mother on the wall, her warm smile a constant reminder of why they had fought so hard. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, they felt truly at peace. The bakery was more than just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, a place where love and justice baked into every corner. And no one, not even someone like Meredith, could ever take that away. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the small kitchen as Taylor slid the first batch of cookies out of the oven. Steam curled into the air, carrying with it a warmth that felt like home, like memories wrapped in layers of love and resilience. Erica sat at the counter, her elbows propped on the table, one hand holding a cup of coffee and the other swiping absent-mindedly through her phone. "These smell just like hers," Erica said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she gestured toward the tray. Taylor smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, a blend of pride and melancholy. "Mom would have told us they need more sugar," they replied, setting the tray on the counter and grabbing another bowl to start mixing the next batch. "Or that we didn't knead the dough long enough," Erica added, a fond laugh bubbling up. I swear, she was never fully satisfied, even when they came out perfect. "She just wanted to push us to do better," Taylor said, their hands moving with muscle memory as they worked the flour into the dough. The sound of it, the scraping of the spoon against the bowl, the soft squelch of butter and sugar blending together, was oddly soothing, and somehow, she always managed to make it fun. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the kitchen quiet except for the rhythmic movements of baking. Taylor paused to glance at the framed photo that sat above the counter, its edges slightly worn from years of moving it between apartments and now into the bakery. Their mother's face, forever etched with a warm, unshakable determination, looked back at them. "She'd be proud of you, you know," Erica said, breaking the silence. Taylor's hands stilled. They looked over at Erica, who was now watching them with the kind of sincerity that made it impossible to deflect. "She'd be proud of us," Taylor corrected gently. "None of this would have been possible without you." "Sure," Erica said, raising her coffee cup in mock humility. "All those hours spent sending angry emails and flipping through legal textbooks. True heroism." Taylor snorted, rolling out the dough and cutting it into perfectly uniform shapes. "Hey, don't downplay it. You were terrifying in those meetings." "Somebody had to be," Erica replied, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "I wasn't going to let anyone mess with what Mom built, especially not someone like Meredith." Taylor exhaled, shaking their head slightly at the name. "I still can't believe how far it all went. It feels surreal sometimes, like it was happening to someone else." "But it wasn't," Erica said firmly. It was you. You stood your ground. You didn't let her win. Taylor leaned against the counter, looking out the window at the now bustling street outside the bakery. The bright, cheerful sign above the door read, Golden Crust, a name their mother had chosen years ago, because she believed it sounded warm, inviting. And it was true. Since the fallout with Meredith, and the changes that followed, the bakery had become more than just a place to buy pastries. It was a space for connection, a hub of the community where everyone, no matter who they were, felt welcome. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again, Taylor said after a moment. The way it felt when she was here, running the bakery. Like it wasn't just about the food, but about what it meant to people. That's because it is what it means to people, Erica said, and you've managed to make it even more than she imagined. Taylor glanced at her, their brow furrowing slightly. What do you mean? Erica gestured toward the wall near the front of the bakery, where photos from a recent community event were pinned alongside handwritten notes of gratitude from customers. That, she said, those photos, those letters, they're proof that you turned this into something bigger. Mom started it, sure. But you built something that feels like home for everyone. Taylor followed her gaze, their chest tightening with emotion. For years, they'd felt like they were just trying to keep the pieces together, to preserve what their mother had created. But now, standing here, hearing Erica's words, they realized she was right. This wasn't just their mother's bakery anymore. It was theirs, built with late nights, quiet determination, and a refusal to let anything tear it apart. The bell above the door jingled, pulling their attention back to the present. A familiar face walked in, Mrs. Patel, a longtime customer who had been one of their mother's closest friends. She smiled warmly as she approached the counter, her eyes lighting up when she saw the cookies on the tray. Ah, I thought I smelled your mother's favorite recipe, Mrs. Patel said, her voice laced with nostalgia. We couldn't resist, Taylor replied, handing her one of the cookies wrapped in a napkin. She took a bite, her eyes closing briefly in appreciation. Just as good as she used to make them, she said, her smile widening. Maybe even better. Taylor laughed softly, shaking their head. Don't let Mom hear you say that. She'd be thrilled, Mrs. Patel said. Then, after a pause, she added, You've done so much for this place, Taylor. More than anyone could have expected. I hope you know how proud she would be. The words landed with a weight that Taylor wasn't sure they'd ever fully be ready for. They nodded, their throat tight with emotion. Thank you, they managed to say. Mrs. Patel left soon after, leaving the bakery quiet again. Erica had returned to her book, and Taylor finished cutting out the last of the cookie dough before sliding it into the oven. As the timer ticked down, Taylor wiped the counter clean, their movements methodical and unhurried. The sun was setting outside, casting a soft orange glow across the front of the bakery. Customers began to thin out, and soon, it was time to close up. Want me to stay and help? Erica asked as she gathered her things. Taylor shook their head. Go. You've done more than enough. I'll finish up. Erica gave them one last look, a mix of pride and affection, before heading out the door. The bell jingled softly behind her, leaving Taylor alone in the quiet of the bakery. They took their time, shutting everything down, savoring the stillness. They turned off the ovens, wiped down the counters one last time, and stacked chairs neatly by the windows. Finally, they walked to the door, flipping the sign to closed. Standing there in the dim light, Taylor turned and looked back at the bakery one last time before leaving. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a story, a legacy of love, resilience, and hope. And as they stepped outside and locked the door behind them, they felt a sense of peace they hadn't known in years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, the world felt brighter, and they were ready.